Godzilla is now in New York City.
Monster 01 and 02, commence the attack.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Stomp This Way. Today we are coming back over to the States to review Pacific Rim, metaphorically speaking. I mean, we're always here in the States, but you know.
Yeah.
Dylan, are you excited to get back to a big budget blockbuster-ish movie?
I guess.
Okay.
So everyone has seen this movie before, right? I think me and Dylan commented.
We've all seen it in theaters. So.
Yeah, I think we commented that we watched it. We haven't. I don't think we've seen it all the way through since.
I haven't
theaters.
seen it all the way through since it came out in 2013.
Yeah, the same with me. So, I think it was interesting to go back and revisit it. Like I said, I hadn't seen it all the way through, and I guess that's going on 7 years now. So, 6.5 or so. So yeah, I mean, I'm surprised that I scheduled this film so far out on the schedule, honestly, because this is a big film.
It's going on almost 8 years.
Yeah.
It's 2021, bud.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Damn, it is 2021. Anyway, this is a big film for American Kaiju film fans, I would say. For at least before the MonsterVerse started, this was like... This and Cloverfield were really like the two big American monster movies, and this one really... sells itself as a kaiju movie. They call the creatures kaiju, obviously. So, and a lot of fans really like it. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people that listen to our podcast are excited that we're finally reviewing it.
What were your thoughts on the movie when you originally saw it back in 2013?
Back in 2013, I mean, so my thoughts were basically like, it's a fun monster movie. Like, it's not anything. I didn't think it was anything really more than that.
I mean, it's not a masterpiece of action or kaiju cinema by any stretch, but I enjoyed it. Of course, I hadn't been indoctrinated into the world of kaiju cinema at that point in time. This is probably, I would assume, one of the first major, I guess what you could consider kaiju films I probably ever saw. Yeah. Since it came out before the 2014 Godzilla.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, I mean, I remember enjoying it when it came out. I remember a lot of people, at school, were talking about, everyone went to go see this movie around here, I feel like.
Yeah, a lot of kids went to go see it, because, I mean, it's giant robots beating the crap out of giant monsters for 2 hours. I mean, come on. What more could you want? And that's what it was, and I think it was good at that, and we'll obviously discuss whether we think it holds up. Andrew, did you enjoy it when you saw it the first time?
Oh, I enjoyed it when I saw it the first time.
And you were 5?
When
he was 12.
I'm kidding.
I'm not that young. It was when I was 12. I had watched the Godzilla movie several times at that point.
Yeah. Fortunately. Right, Andrew? Yeah, but anyway, so some foreign language titles for this film were Battle of the Pacific, which
kind of a cool title.
What they called it in Portugal, and Circle of Fire, which they called it in Brazil.
Not as cool a title, but still kind of cool.
And some, background. I mean, obviously, you can literally read anything you want to read about the making of this movie or watch anything you want to watch. So I just kind of condensed it down to what I thought was more interesting. Screenwriter Travis Beacham conceived of the idea while walking along the beach near Santa Monica Pier, imagining a giant robot and a giant monster fighting to the death in the sea. He wrote a 25-page treatment, which Legendary purchased on May 28th of 2010. Del Toro had struck a deal with Universal in which he agreed to produce and co-write Pacific Rim if they allowed him to direct an adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness.
Did that ever come to fruition?
Next bullet point. Included in the deal was a clause that said Del Toro would direct Pacific Rim if At the Mountains of Madness fell through, which it did due to Del Toro's insistence on a $160 million budget and R rating, which the studio did not think were compatible. Del Toro and Beacham spent a year working on the script. along with a few uncredited rewrites. Filmed primarily in Toronto from November 14th of 2011 to April of 2012. Filmed over a period of 103 days.
It's a pretty long shoot.
Del Toro spent much of the shoot working 17 to 18-hour days, 7 days a week. After originally saying it would not be converted to 3D, Del Toro changed his mind, although I'm pretty sure the studio probably changed his mind. But the conversion took 40 weeks longer than the average conversion.
That explains why it took them so long to get this movie out from April 2012 to July.
Yeah, July 2013.
Yeah.
There was approximately an hour worth of cut footage, so it could have been longer. But Del Toro already was very adamant about keeping this. They say Del Toro, I don't know, probably the studio too, about keeping it close to 2 hours, So, approximately 100 different kaiju and 100 different Jaegers were designed for the film, even though only a fraction of that amount was actually used. ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, did the effects for the film. And Ramin Djawadi's soundtrack peaked at number 7 on the U.S. Billboard Top Soundtracks.
Nice.
Cool. But some box office. It was released on July 12th of 2013. Had a budget of approximately $190 million.
Pretty hefty.
Domestic opening of $37 million. And a total domestic gross of $101.8 million. So, not great domestically. But total worldwide gross was $411 million. So I'm
just going to go ahead and assume that this movie did pretty well in China and Japan.
Probably. And, $411 million, it probably just did a little more than break even, barely. But I guess enough to justify a sequel. So here we are.
Which we'll talk about in a couple weeks.
Yeah, we will talk about that. But anyway, we're going to listen to the trailer. We're going to come back. We'll read off the cast and crew. Dylan will read off the plot summary. And we will discuss our thoughts on Pacific Rim. See you in a bit.
We always thought alien life would come from the stars. But it came from deep beneath the Pacific.
What the hell is going on?
The first kaiju made land in San Francisco. The second attack hit Manila. Then the third one hit Cabo. And then we learned this was not going to stop. In order to fight monsters, we created monsters of our own. We needed a new weapon. The Jaeger program was born. Two pilots, our minds, our memories, connected. And man and machine become one.
Today, at the edge of our hope, end of our time, we've chosen to believe in each other. The day we face the monsters that are at our door, today we are canceling the apocalypse.
It is pretty cool.
Pacific Rim.
All right, we're back.
Are we?
Yes, we are.
Oh, okay.
Okay. This film is directed by Guillermo del Toro, obviously. Written by Travis Beacham and Guillermo del Toro. Music by Ramin Djawadi, who is now most famous for Game of Thrones, I would say.
Probably.
Effects by John Knoll and Hal T. Hickle. Effects by a lot of people, but those are two of the lead effects guys that I saw. And starring Charlie Hunnam, Idris Elba, Rinko Kikuchi, Charlie Day, and Ron Perlman. And a lot of other people, but I didn't feel like reading all them off, so there you go. So what is the very condensed plot of this movie.
Condensed, even though this is a large paragraph.
Yeah, well, I tried to stick to the two main characters' plot.
In the near future, Kaiju are coming through a portal deep in the ocean to attack Earth, and in response, humanity has built giant robots called Jaegers to combat them. One of the pilots of these robot monstrosities is Raleigh Beckett, whose brother and co-pilot is killed during a battle with a Kaiju. He quits the Jaeger program and spends the next 5 years working in construction before Marshal Pentecost recruits him back to the program. There he meets Mako Mori, a pilot in training who was raised by Pentecost after her parents were killed during a monster attack. Although Pentecost is against her piloting a Jaeger, eventually Mako and Raleigh are both assigned to Gypsy Danger, and together they face antagonists both Kaiju and human. But as the Jaeger program is being wound down by the upper brass, Pentecost has devised one last mission to end the war with the Kaiju, blowing up the portal in the sea. After one of the Jaeger pilots for Striker Eureka is injured, Pentecost is forced to go on the mission even though he is dying of cancer and the radiation exposure will likely kill him. Gypsy Danger and Striker Eureka go down to the breach and engage in battle with 3 powerful Kaiju, and Pentecost detonates the nuclear bomb that they are carrying to kill the Kaiju and clear the way for Gypsy Danger. Raleigh and Mako do battle with the last surviving monster as they fall into the portal, and they self-destruct Gypsy's nuclear core as they launch safely to the surface in escape pods. The 2 pilots embrace as helicopters arrive to retrieve them, and credits roll.
All right, so this movie starts off with your typical Hollywood data dump. We have a
prologue.
We have a montage. Well, this is a long prologue, but it starts out the pre-prologue is this data dump where they have a series of newsreel footage, and he's talking about how this fissure opened up deep in this sea, and
monsters started coming through it.
So they started getting their butts kicked. And normal weaponry had no effect on them. So they, again, the biggest caveat you just gotta go with this movie. We were watching this movie with my dad today, and he kept pointing out how stupid it was. But the one thing you gotta just kind of roll with this movie is that for whatever reason, they figured it the best way to fight giant monsters
was with giant robots.
Was to build these giant robots. I mean, does it make logical sense? No, but again, this is kind of like a lot of Del Toro movies. It's not. Del Toro has famously said, never let logic get in the way of a good story. So, that's kind of what you got to go with here. Just roll with it, okay? I mean, we watch a lot of Godzilla movies that don't make much sense. Does it ever make sense that they built Mechagodzilla to fight Godzilla? No, but okay.
But they did.
So, yeah, that's like the biggest caveat I got to give this movie. And I'm willing to give it that because I'm a fan of these types of movies. Yeah. And I just want to see giant robots beat the crap out of giant monsters for 2 hours. So I'm willing
that's
to
what
give
we're here for.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. But anyway, so yeah, they built these programs, robots, but the Jaeger program is also starting to be wound down because they've decided that a wall around, I guess, the coastal regions is
the most effective way.
Which again is another kind of dumb thing. Like, why would they ever think a wall would do any good? But whatever. But yeah, then we get into the real prologue, where
it's about 15 minutes long.
This prologue is actually, I think, closer to 17 minutes long.
There, yeah.
Not the first act, the prologue. And this movie, I think, is about 2 hours and 11 minutes at total.
I think that's including the credits.
So probably about 2 hours if you take away the credits or so. And it's Raleigh and his brother are going in Gypsy Danger to fight this monster. Mm-hmm. And Raleigh's brother gets killed, and Raleigh
yanked out, and
and Raleigh stumbles onto a beach, and then he
decides to quit, and so he decides that the best course of action for him is to start helping build the wall.
Yeah. So, and again, this is a good way to set up a character. He has he loses something very important to him at the beginning of this movie, and one of the ideas that is front and center of this movie is this idea of drifting, where two people, because the Jaegers are too big for one person, because they had to control it with their mind. So, and it's too big for one person to do by themselves.
They have to have this neural link that connects people, and the more drift compatible you are, the better you'll be able to pilot your Jaeger.
And some people might say that Del Toro borrowed this idea from Evangelion. Del Toro, I believe I've read where he said that he never thought of Evangelion. I don't even think he says he'd even seen it before he made this movie. So that, he didn't, cheat or didn't copy off Evangelion. I mean, maybe that's true, but there's a lot of similarities. I mean, the idea of connecting psychologically with this giant robot and fighting giant monsters. But, I'll take Del Toro at his word. I'll say that maybe he didn't plagiarize it. Okay, so whatever. But, so it sets up an interesting conflict for this movie. He quits. He's working on building the wall as a construction worker, living day to day,
And Beckett or Pentecost shows up.
Pentecost, great name.
Senior Idris Elba.
Idris Elba, who, if you need someone to look cool, you get Idris Elba.
Yeah.
And so it gets him back to the program, and we meet the character of Mako, who's this Japanese girl that I guess she's the one like scouting all the new recruits and everything.
She handpicked all the recruits.
Handpicked all the recruits, and she's very judgmental towards Raleigh for whatever reason. But we learn it's because she wants to be a pilot, but Pentecost won't let her. And you'll figure out way later in the movie that Pentecost actually raised her, so it's basically her dad.
About 45 minutes in.
Yeah, so there's that. But I think as far as like characters and stuff go, it's Del Toro tries, I think, to kind of flesh out Raleigh and Mako. Obviously Charlie has the character arc of he lost someone, his brother and his drift partner, and so he has to learn to overcome that and drifts with somebody new and get back out there in the field and everything.
And then Mako's trying to, overcome the shadow of living, or, her father, or quote-unquote father, trying to control her and not wanting her to get hurt because he's very protective of her. And
overcoming her fear.
And overcoming her fears of kaiju and stuff like that.
Yeah. So. But this is where I guess I'll say what I was going to say earlier. And this may be mischaracterizing this situation, but it feels like this was very much Del Toro's second choice as far as projects goes for this period in his career. I mean, he really wanted to do that H.P. Lovecraft movie, but he kind of just
when you really think about this movie as a whole, especially if you've seen much of Guillermo del Toro stuff, it seems kind of out of place in his filmography. It's not something that you would assume he would probably normally do. This is a very large budget, CGI heavy blockbuster action film, and that's not really what Guillermo del Toro does per se. I mean, he did Hellboy in the past, but I mean they weren't like $200 million CGI, kaiju fests. Yeah, a lot of Guillermo del Toro does a lot of practical effects and a lot of smaller character movies.
Yeah. And I'm not doubting that Del Toro put a lot of work into this movie because I know that he did, but I do feel like my lack of passion for these characters kind of reflects the fact that this wasn't a passion project per se for Del Toro. This was more of a job that he was given, and like I said, I know that he worked really hard on it. He put a lot of thought, and he really does.
I think he had a good time making these creatures and designing these Jaegers and stuff like that. Because that's what Del Toro does best is creating creatures. Yeah, he loves it.
But at the end of the day, it wasn't his story really. So most of his movies, well, except Hellboy, obviously, but it's ideas that stemmed from him, and he has a deep passion to tell these stories. And he, Del Toro loves his characters. You can watch his other movies, and they got a lot of creatures and funky stuff, but they also have really fleshed out characters. This movie, maybe not so much, but yeah. So I mean, and you look at like the rush, like a lot of the side characters especially are very stereotypical or caricatures. Like these scientists are just way over the top caricatures. Charlie Day and the other guy.
Whose name you did not put down.
Yeah, I guess I didn't put his name down. They're just, I mean, they provide some good comic relief, but they're also very over the top. You have like the Russian pilots that are very stereotypical Russians.
Yeah.
Three Chinese brothers that pilot this other Jaeger, and they're
very, like when they had their little martial arts scene,
very
like,
generic,
doing their martial arts stuff. Yeah. And then you also have like, we have the pilots of Striker Eureka or whatever it was called.
They're your class of like jarhead type guys.
And the younger one is like,
he's got a chip on his shoulder.
He's the douchebag of the movie. He has to pick fights with Charlie Hunnam and everything. And then as far as like acting goes, I think, now listen, objectively speaking, Charlie Hunnam looks amazing.
Charlie Hunnam's a decent looking dude.
And if, you just walk around with his shirt off a couple of scenes, he's done his job, But, I think he does an all right job. I think Rinko Kikuchi, and maybe this is not the case, but I think she's focusing so much on saying her lines in English that she doesn't really emote so much.
No, she does not emote very well. She's very, very static.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it's because she's trying so hard to make sure she's plainly saying her lines in English that she's not really being able to focus on her facial features as much. And then, everyone else is just kind of whatever. Except for, I will say, Idris Elba. I think he does a good job of being what they want him to be, which is this really cool, badass leader type. He gives, 2 or 3 speeches in this movie.
A very Independence Day speech toward the end.
Yeah, it's very Independence Day. I can almost hear Bill Pullman saying, "Today
is our Independence Day."
But it's instead, "Today we're canceling the apocalypse." Probably the most famous line from this movie. But he's pretty good. I love it.
I like Idris Elba.
Yeah.
But yeah. So once that prologue kind of ends, we go almost the next hour without a
the next major kaiju fight is around the hour 5 mark, somewhere around.
So how were you feeling during this hour without creature fights?
I mean, it's not bad per se. I mean, but we're trying to flesh out these characters, but not doing a fantastic job of it, which is somewhat I would say I mean, obviously it's the writing's fault because they didn't flesh out the characters in writing. But there's some entertaining moments here and there. I mean, we get the sequence where Charlie Hunnam is fighting all these recruits, and then he ends up fighting Mako because he's like, I want her.
Yeah.
And then we get the conflict between her and Idris Elba about how she wants to be a pilot, and he's like, no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I mean, it's okay. And then we finally get to learn a little bit about Mako and why she is the way she is, and what her kind of story is, very briefly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not bad. I think the pacing of this movie is all right.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I agree.
Even with the long stretch without giant monster action.
Yeah, and it helps that this, like most Del Toro movies, very visually stunning movie.
And to be fair, Charlie Hunnam is fairly charismatic as an actor.
Yeah,
so.
he's pretty good. But visually, this movie is keeping me engaged. Like that scene you were talking about with Mako, that is just visually a stunning movie with the ashes falling and her running around screaming. Definitely. And I think a lot of this movie is filmed great, and Del Toro does a great job of establishing the scale of these monsters.
Definitely.
You can always feel that sense of just massive size, and that really is cool. But yeah, I love the way Del Toro directs this movie. But yeah, so we finally get back, and the second hour of this movie is pretty much just straight action.
It's pretty action.
They get into this fight in Hong Kong with a couple of kaiju and 3 Jaegers, and there's a lot of just about an hour of giant robots beating the crap out of giant monsters.
Now, in the meantime, there is a fairly front-forward side plot about Charlie Day, who has since drifted with a piece of a kaiju brain, and he's now trying to find, and he's gathered information about how they are like a hive mind and they are being created, and then he has to go to Ron Perlman's character and get a new kaiju brain so he can drift with it again and find out, more information, and he finds out, that Idris Elba's character's plan is not going to work properly. So.
Yeah, and this whole side plot feels very much like universe building for spin-offs and or sequels. I mean, it does tie back into the main plot of the movie, obviously, with him drifting and figuring out everything, but I don't know. It just feels like they're building this underground universe.
Yeah, it is kind of universe building. We're finding out more about these monsters. We see images. Obviously, there's a lot of imagery in the sequences where he's drifting with this kaiju brain of them being essentially created or cloned, and you can see the god type figures in their society that are building them and running the whole operation, and that they're doling out orders and sending them on their way. So.
Yeah, and spoiler alert, if you've seen the sequel, you know that this side plot plays a huge role in the second film, so there's that. But yeah, so we had this big fight in Hong Kong, and Ron Perlman does get eaten by a monster. That'll come back at the mid-credit scene. But no, I think, again, just talking Del Toro's direction and everything, I think these monster fights are really entertaining. I mean, are they kind of over the top? Sure, but
they do a good job creating a good scope too. There's decent wide shots where you're getting to see the action, see what's going on. Yeah. It's not like super close combat where you're not being able and
it's not like a Transformers movie
and like choppily edited where you're not really able to tell what's going on between these giant monsters and robots.
Yeah, and like I said, it is kind of over the top, kind of anime-ish when they bring out like a sword or they
press the button sword
or they bring out like a barge boat and use it as a bat. I mean, but I have a lot of fun with it. I think it's entertaining, and one of their chests opens and they shoot rockets out of it. And, lots of fun stuff.
It's kind of cool.
It's cool. But anyway, so they have this big fight, and then basically they're going to go strap a nuclear bomb to the back of Striker Eureka and take it down to the bottom of the sea and
then drop this bomb.
But they figure out through Charlie Days and his other scientists mind melding, quote unquote, with the monster that
it had that to enter into the breach you have to it has to read the genetic sequence of the monsters to be able to enter into their quote unquote world.
So they get down there. There's Gypsy Danger and Striker Eureka, and they get down there and they get into a big fight with 2 Category 4s and then a Category 5.
The first ever Category 5.
The first time I watched this movie, I was like, wouldn't it be so cool if it was
Godzilla
as the Category 5? But that is what it is. But anyway, when they do that, and so Idris Elba, he's in Striker Eureka because the other co-pilot hurt his arm or something. It's a father-son duo and the father.
So now Idris Elba's piloting this Jaeger.
But he has cancer because of the radiation from the early model Jaegers.
Yep.
And
from Demonstus.
It's basically a death sentence for him. But he goes down there and they decide that to clear the way for Gypsy Danger, they're gonna.
So they blow themselves up.
They blow themselves up, but it doesn't kill the Category 5.
Nope.
So Gypsy Danger tackles it into the breach,
and stabs it and takes it with it, and then kills it,
and then they set the nuclear core reactor of Gypsy Danger to
sends Mako on her way, and Charlie Hunnam is activating this nuclear reactor so it'll melt down,
and he gets himself out of there and blows up, seals the breach, and that's the end of the movie.
Happy day. They lived.
They lived.
They live all happily ever after.
For now.
And
then in the mid-credit scene,
Ron Perlman
cuts his way out
of the Kaiju that ate him earlier.
So he's still alive. So there's that.
He's still alive.
But like I said, as a whole, it's not a masterclass in screenwriting or anything.
No, but it's still a fun time. The characters are written well enough that you still care about them to a degree.
It gets you through the scenes where there's no kaiju.
And there are fun sequences in between the monster action that keep you at least moderately engaged until you get back to the kaiju fights, and which is the part that you're really here to see.
And then when we do see the kaiju fights, I think they're well staged. I think they're really entertaining. I think Del Toro, I think his passion did lie with making these monsters and and filming these fight scenes. And I think it's a lot of fun. And there's plenty of monsters, plenty of screen time for the monsters and for the Jaegers. So we're not short-sighted there or anything. So no, it is what it is, and it does a really good job at being what it is.
I definitely think that it kind of knew what it was going in. It was just supposed to be that people. I think what Guillermo del Toro really knew when he started making this movie was people are what they're wanting to see is kaijus fighting each other, and he tried to do his best to give people an entertaining movie with some kind of characters to it. And I think that they accomplished what they set out to do.
I think they do a better job of it than Transformers movies.
Definitely.
Yes.
So there's that. Anyway, y'all want to talk about creature design?
So,
I mean...
Kind of broad. There's
kind of broad.
A lot of
creatures.
creatures.
A lot of them. We'll talk specifically about Gypsy Danger, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool. I mean, it's a giant humanoid robot.
Yeah.
I
it's
like
a helmet type thing.
Helmet with yellow visor on it. And,
visor.
I think it looks pretty cool. They break out the sword later, and it has this plasma cannon thing.
It's kind of cool.
It's kind of cool.
And the Jaegers overall, I mean, I think they're giant robots. You have the Chinese one that has the single Cyclops eye thing.
Yeah, and then it has 3 arms.
There's 3
the Russian one is
this tank looking thing.
It's a tank looking thing. It's got a big domed head type thing. It's one of the original.
Yeah.
And then I guess
Striker Eureka. It kind of looks like
the newest
Danger.
model. It looks like a modernized version of Gypsy Danger, almost. Like if you took Master Chief and made him a giant robot.
Yeah.
I guess so. Yeah, that would be pretty accurate.
That's it.
And then, for Kaiju, I mean, you have... They all kind of have a similar, like, very base look, I think. And I think that's on purpose because, they're all supposed to be, like, clones made by these monsters, aliens.
Some of them have, defining head characteristics or whatever.
Like, you have Knife Head, that's basically the big budget version of Giron.
Yeah, there's it's shown there's a giant crab-like creature that attacked this is the creature that attacked Mako when she was a kid.
Yeah.
Kind of looks like Ebra, but like a big budget version.
Yeah. And then you have like I forget what it's called, but the big fat one that shoots the EMP burst or whatever, kind of gorilla-esque maybe, kind of like Kong. You have Hammerhead, I think, is the one that looks like has the Hammerhead shark head on it.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Then you have the Category 5, which is like this, got like tentacles, but it also has like appendages. And
it's interesting. I think the creature design is pretty good. I like it. I think that Guillermo del Toro, I mean, he kind of came up with a fairly generic design, but then modified certain things to make each one have their own characteristics. Yeah. And I think they work pretty well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Category 5, Cthulhu. I was like, almost like Cthulhu-esque.
Well, I mean, he was trying to make an H.P. Lovecraft movie.
There you go. But yeah, so I think overall creature design is
pretty good.
It's pretty good. I mean, maybe they started to kind of blend together after a while, but again, I think part of that was partly on purpose because they are supposed to be clones or whatever.
Yeah. It's expensive to create a bunch of different CGI models, too.
It is. Going into effects, top-notch effects.
Especially at the time. I think that some of the CGI looks a little glossy, almost 8 years later. But I think for the most part, it holds up pretty well.
And they use there's a lot of fights in the rain. And they're all the fights, or not all, I guess. But most of the fights are in the rain at night. The last fight, they're just completely submerged in water.
Underwater.
Which kind of helps shield some of the glossiness of it. But no, I think for the most part, they look great. Especially like, that early scene where the one is destroying the San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge.
Definitely.
And you see all the little cars, and then when they get into the fight on land in Hong Kong with the kaiju, I think that looks like a great sequence. I think the effects are really good.
The effects hold up pretty well.
Yeah. $190 million well spent.
It'll do you.
It'll work out for you in the end.
The score.
And then the score, I really like
Ramin Djawadi's score.
I like it.
His electric guitar main theme, da 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 da. Yeah, I think it rocks. I think it's really good.
And it's the score fits the sequences that it's put with very well. Definitely, like certain situations get you really hyped up for what's going on. Like the scene where Gypsy Danger walks out with the freaking cargo ship and getting ready to smack him with a baseball bat. I mean, it just works.
It works.
Ramin Djawadi, I like Ramin Djawadi as a composer.
I love his Game of Thrones
music. His Game of Thrones music is fantastic. He did the score for the original Iron Man movie in 2008.
Yeah,
so
he does Westworld too, which I haven't watched, but I did listen to a couple tracks off of it. He's a great working composer.
He's a talented man.
I mean, there is a couple of times in this movie where you can kind of hear some Game of
of the Game of Thrones stuff. Which I guess at this point he'd been doing Game of Thrones for 2 or 3 years.
2 or 3, yeah. I think it premiered
about
in 2011.
It came out in 2011, so about 2 years by the time it came
2
out.
years.
So.
But I think it's great. It works really well for the movie. So y'all ready for some final thoughts on Pacific Rim?
Guess so. Andrew.
Well, I think this is an all in all a pretty decent movie. They put together. The score is amazing. I love the score. The bass guitar part is pretty awesome. The monsters, the design of most of the monsters look pretty good. And I like the Jaegers. I like the Gypsy Danger. I like how it's made and looks cool. And, I think I'm going to give this movie a B.
A B. Dylan, what do you think?
I think overall, this movie set out to do what it accomplished. Make an Americanized version, big budget, giant kaiju film with robots and kaiju beating the ever-loving crap out of each other.
Yeah.
And when it's doing that, I think this movie is really fun and really entertaining.
Yeah.
The more character-centered moments are not the best. These characters aren't written particularly interesting. They're trying to give... They kind of have some backstories, but they're not particularly fleshed out in a way that makes you care about them, extreme amounts or anything that you're like, oh man, I just really hope they make it through. But you're like, oh cool, they made it through.
Yeah.
But the sequences where this more character focused during that hour stretch where we don't really have a whole lot of kaiju action is sufficient, and it's paced well enough, and there's different little sequences here and there sprinkled throughout that section of the movie that make it still intriguing and entertaining to a degree. I think the creature design is fun. I think Guillermo del Toro had a lot of fun. Do they kind of blend together? Yeah, but when you're trying to make a bunch of different CGI models for monsters, that gets really expensive.
Yeah.
But each one of them has their kind of own little characteristic and defining traits that make them stand out, and some of them are pretty cool. It's kind of cool to see what could have been of I would assume the legendary MonsterVerse is probably not going to work out to what we expect. So some of these classic Gamera monsters that we've seen so far, and some of the classic Godzilla monsters, what would have been a more big budget CGI modernized version of them is pretty cool. And I really like the design of the Jaegers. I think the effects hold up pretty well. Glossy at points, but for almost 8 years old at this point, I think it holds up really well. And then the score is fantastic for this movie. So overall, I actually think it's a pretty good movie. I'm going to give it a B+.
All right, yeah, I agree. Like you said, this movie accomplishes what it sets out to do. It's a blockbuster Japanese kaiju movie made in America, and it's really good at that. The monster fights are great. Does it always make logical sense? No, but again, rarely do kaiju movies that come out of Japan or whatever the case may be. So, I'm willing to give it as big caveats. I mean, there are some things I wish they had spent a little more time on. Maybe that hour of cut footage, they flesh out these characters a little more. But then again, I really wouldn't want this movie
to watch a 3-hour Pacific Rim movie.
I wouldn't want to watch like 2 hours of no kaiju battles and 1 hour of kaiju fights. I don't think that'd be a good ratio, especially for an American audience that just came to see giant robots and giant monsters beat the crap out of each other. And I mean, like I said, I feel like Del Toro was not as passionate about the characters in this movie as he normally is in his typical projects. I don't think this is Del Toro's best movie.
No.
But again, I think he did a great job of, visually this movie is great.
Absolutely.
Just color palette, and then giving these monsters a sense of scale, the way he frames and the way he stages and choreographs these monster fights.
Some very beautiful sequences and like just little flash shots here and there too, which are really cool.
So I enjoy this movie a lot. I think it is a really good American version of a kaiju film.
A good precursor to what the legendary MonsterVerse was going to be.
Should have been.
Should have been.
I'll give this film a B+ as well. It is quite entertaining.
Do you think if Legendary and Warner Brothers were to have gone closer to this route, had a little bit better characters? Because we've talked about the 2014 Godzilla and and we haven't talked about Kong Skull Island yet, but we've talked about Godzilla King of the Monsters, and our biggest problems with those are the characters in the films. There's literally no character development for them. Had they been slightly more fleshed out, maybe like this, had a little bit more to them, do you think that the Legendary MonsterVerse would be in better shape than it is?
Well, if you look at the box office of this movie, it didn't perform much better than those than those MonsterVerse movies. I think they did try to course correct with King of Monsters and make it more like this movie. I just think that, and I think largely it is similar to this movie. I just think that the characters in that movie are worse than the characters in this movie, and are just, so boring when the monsters are not on screen in that movie, which again isn't a lot of the time, but still, I like these characters better than I did those.
Definitely.
I think, I don't know, like I said, if you look at the box office for this movie, there's nothing there to indicate that. I just think it's hard to sell a kaiju movie to American audiences unless it's just a great movie. I think some people say that you just can't make a Godzilla movie work in the States. I disagree. I think if you make a great movie, you can make it work. I think there's a market there for Godzilla. You've seen...
I definitely think there's a market for Godzilla. I think, honestly, the best course of action is to take a more... I guess a smaller scale approach. Like, still, yes, to a degree, this big budget type situation, but maybe not as huge a budget as we're talking, like $250 million movie. Something where you're having to be more creative and make your movie a more character centric film. That turns out a lot better and have great kaiju action, because you have a little bit tighter budget, so you're having to be more creative there.
Well, I think that's kind of what Edward's movie was. You know, I mean, it was a big budget movie, but it wasn't.
It was a lot more. Tried to be a lot more character centric than like say King of the Monsters.
The problem is that the characters just aren't that good. I mean, you got to have good characters. You got to have a good writer. And I just don't think Legendary has pulled the right writers.
No, they're pulling because they're spending. They have these giant budgets, but they're spending so much money on CGI and all this stuff that they're not spending money on pulling in. Solid writers. I think it's part of their problem.
Yeah. I just think,
and they're giving these movies to almost no name directors too. So like Gareth Edwards, that was like his first like huge production.
It was only his second movie after Monsters.
And then like Michael Dougherty, that he hadn't done a whole lot. And then Adam Wingard's doing GVK, and I mean he hasn't done a whole lot of just fantastic note.
Of the three, he has the most movies behind him, but
some of them are not fantastic.
Some of them are not good. He's got some good movies. He's got.
I don't even remember who directed Kong Skull Island.
John Voight Roberts. I
don't know what he had done.
I don't know what he had done. I think he was pretty small time before he had done that.
Yeah, so they're bringing in these small time directors and writers, and I think if they maybe spend a little more money on that end, it would probably have turned out better.
But speaking of the MonsterVerse, I guess the big news this week is that Godzilla vs. Kong has moved to March 26th.
Moved up
2 months. So now, just in a couple months' time,
probably honestly the smart choice for them. I think
out of any competition.
I don't think necessarily that.
I don't think the theater market will be any better in May than it is in March.
It's not going to be any better in May than it is in March. I think that we're still going to struggle for the majority of the first half to at least the first probably 2 or 3 quarters of this year is going to struggle until people start to feel safe if the market's still there for it, which I think that there are certain movies that have come out that have at least proven there's a market for, family films. Mm-hmm. Like The Croods has actually done fairly well, barring the situation. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's more than doubled its production budget now, which is kind of impressive. But at the same time, I think that moving this movie up into a time of the year where the first quarter of the year usually doesn't have a whole lot of major films that people are just dying to see, you got a potential to make at least a little bit of money at the box office, and then they're doing this hybrid release strategy where it's also going to be premiering on HBO Max. I think that might hurt their box office numbers a little bit, but at least it'll give it a chance to make some money.
Yeah, I mean, and look, we live down here in the South. I think regionally, I think we get kind of a false sense of how willing people are to go see movies, because I listen to other podcasts and read other things where, pretty much every theater on the East and West Coast is closed. And most theaters up north are still not open. So down here in the South, the governments and the people are more willing to open and then go see those movies, and still a lot smaller crowds than what would usually. I don't see a world where theaters are still going to be really around by next May. So, release it in March when they don't have, Black Widow or whatever else to compete with. And
all kinds of stuff. I mean, this movie's getting ready to come out against Spiral and all kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is now that it'll come out the week before No Time to Die is supposed to come out. Yeah. But, it is whatever. So, and then along with that announcement came 2 seconds of new footage.
Literally like 2 seconds. Like Kong comes out of the water and decks Godzilla in the face.
You see Godzilla launch himself out of the water, then a shot of Kong, and then, Kong decking Godzilla in the face.
That's literally it.
I'm sure, obviously, a trailer has to be coming sometime soon. They've only given themselves 2 months to market this thing, so they're going to have to cram a lot of marketing into 2 months. Or, like you mentioned, they could do a limited marketing approach and keep a lot of the details hidden, which is whatever, I guess. Whatever they think.
People be like, ooh, I wonder what that is. I wonder what's actually going to happen. Like, the only footage we've actually seen in this movie is Godzilla and Kong standing on an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
And Godzilla coming out of the water, and then Kong decking him in the face.
That's
literally all we've seen.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe like you kind of said it like similar to like a Cloverfield type thing. Like there was very
little
marketing for that movie, and it people were like, ooh, what's this going to be about? What's actually going to happen in this movie?
Yeah.
Maybe if you just your only marketing is just like, oh, there's a big battle coming between Godzilla and Kong, and that's the only footage you show. People will be like, well, now I got to see it. Now I got to know how the fight turns out or what's going to happen.
I don't know if they're saying I got to see it, but yeah.
Yeah.
I got to watch that on HBO Max.
Now that it's on HBO Max, more people might actually watch it. The question is, what's the revenue model for HBO Max? Nobody knows. But anyway, so yeah, that's pretty much all for the news. Andrew and I earlier this morning recorded our big discussion episode over Godzilla, the series, which is the TriStar animated series. That'll probably come out Friday morning. I probably will set that for our release. What else comes out on Friday mornings, Dylan?
Oh, Friday mornings? Guys, our new podcast, Movies Don't Create Psychos. This next week should be an episode over Wrong Turn 3.
Left 4 Dead. They totally messed up on the subtitles for those movies.
Yeah, they could have called the fourth one Left 4 Dead, but then that's already been done by a video game. So.
They could have called the second one, I said, call the second one Wrong Turns, or, another Wrong Turn. I don't know.
Is what it is.
Wrong Turn.
But yeah, so our new podcast comes out on Fridays. Keep a lookout for that. The third episode, or technically, I guess, fourth episode, over Wrong Turn 3 coming out this weekend.
That's right. But as far as this podcast goes, you can contact us at stompthisway1954@gmail.com.
That is true. We're also up on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're at Stomp This Way on all those platforms. Make sure you give us a like or a follow. Be sure to tell your friends about us.
That's right. We also have a website. Andrew, where is that website?
Well, that website is at www.stompthisway.podbean.com.
Absolutely. Over there, you can see our full schedule of events. And if you are to look over there, you'll see that next week we are going to be wrapping up the Showa era Gamera films with Gamera Super Monster.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I feel Dylan needs to ride his wheel right now because I'm not sure he's going to make it through it.
And then the following week, you can also see on that fancy smanchy schedule that we were going to talk about the sequel to this film that we just talked about, Pacific Rim Uprising.
That's right. I also need to update that fancy smanchy schedule because they moved the release date for Godzilla vs. Kong. So that update will be coming soon. Keep a lookout for that. You can also see the grades for previous films, all of our backlogged episodes, and occasional news and updates.
Absolutely.
But I think that's all we got for you this week. Again, don't forget to turn in next week for the final film in the Showa era Gamera trilogy before we move on to the 90s rebooted era. So excited.
Ugh.
No. Yes.
No. The Super Monster.
Oh. Yeah. But anyway, as always, I'm Aaron.
I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dylan. And we'll catch you in the next one.